All right, so thanks everybody for sticking around for this next conversation. That was a great conversation that we just finished. And now we're sort of moving to something that is a little bit less common in everyone's vocabulary. And so we're talking about the hard-to-abate sectors. And so I'm really excited to be hosting this panel today and hearing and learning from the speakers that we have today. So I'm Marian Van Pelt, as noted. I'm a Senior VP at ICF, focused on climate, energy, and transportation. And I'm joined by Adam Klauber, who is Vice President of Sustainability and ESG with World Energy. Mitch Toomey, who's a Vice President of Sustainability and Responsible Care with the American Chemistry Council. And Jawaad Malik, who is the Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer with SoCalGas. And I'll let you each get into a little bit more detail about what you do in just a moment. Sure. But first, I just wanted to start the conversation by saying I've been attending this conference for many years now, and it's been a very interesting journey. For a while, we were talking about how do organizations have a carbon footprint? What does that look like? How do we get our arms around it? And then we transitioned into conversations about sustainability. And then we started looking more deeply at resilience and adaptation. And now everyone is very familiar with all of those terms, and we're looking really seriously at decarbonization. And so we've moved past the should I act stage, and we've moved more carefully into many of you have probably taken significant reduction targets. You're well on your way, and you're wondering sort of what's next. And so we're moving into the how phase of this. And that brings us really closely into the conversations that we just had with the energy sector is certainly significant, and the electricity grid conversations are part of everyone's achievement of their targets. And then there's a lot of things that people still really need to figure out how to tackle. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So how about we'll go around the room and just for a moment have each of you tell us, how you're one of these happy warriors that we were just talking about. What do you do? What are you doing in this space? And what brings you to the panel today? So let's start with you, Adam.
Thank you, Marian. Make sure it's coming through here, my speaker. So I'm the Vice President of Sustainability and ESG for World Energy. We are a renewable fuels producer. We actually are the first sustainable aviation fuel producer in the world. Our plant is just down the road in Paramount. We are expanding there from our 50 million capacity plant up to another 250 million gallons. So it'll be over 300 million gallons in 2016. This is a small amount for the global need. 100 billion gallons is the annual consumption for aviation. So We're making a mark here in California, but we've got a lot further to go. And to that end, we are also building a plant in Houston. The investment levels for these plants are between $2 and $3 billion, so there's significant capital assets. And we're also building a 3 gigawatt green hydrogen facility off the coast of Newfoundland, which will be a $12 billion investment. And we are committed to driving down carbon intensity in our products. We know how essential that these fuels are. Not every sector can electrify, and that's clear in heavy transport, especially in aviation. So we think that it's really important to move in a big way and secure the investments that we need to make these transitions when it comes to heavy industry. With that.
Mitch?
Sure. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. Mitch Toomey with the American Chemistry Council. Our members, and we represent a large majority of the facilities in the United States. We're a responsive, service-oriented industry. We respond to market demands. We always have, and the waves of sustainability that have gone through society, whether it was back when there was a need for immunizations or clean water or what have you, science has figured it out. There have been ways to figure out in a small scale how to do that, and then the industrialization of those solutions has been what's kept us going, frankly, as a species. And I think we have a new set of demands now where we have to produce this kind of the same solutions and the same benefits, but without certain outputs. And we can do that too. I think that our chemists, the engineers, can figure those things out. The question is, how do we sequence them? How do we finance them? And how do we roll them out through the transition? So I think that's the biggest challenge we have is, yes, we have incredibly energy-intensive processes. There's this kind of, the chemistry industry is complicated, but there's this one thing called the cracker, which is it's kind of like the crucible, the high energy, 800 degrees Celsius, high pressure, but it's the tool that you use to unlock all of the advanced materials from raw materials that we have on the planet. However, there's no way at this point yet to have an electric cracker, so you have to fuel that. It's one of these similar issue. We'd love to buy your fuel for that, because right now it's mostly natural gas, or maybe we have an option here as well. But it's just a necessary part of delivering, the carpets, the iPhones, anything in this room. I mean, you have to go through that moment of breaking it apart and then putting it back together. And that's what the chemistry industry does, and that's why there's this huge need for energy. We're taking steps to electrify. Members are doing that. We've got European members who are co-financed with European governments, electrifying those processes. But I think we're going to find that it's just going to take a transition of doing things in a kind of a hodgepodge of ways to get through until we do have those innovations at scale. So, how do we make it through the transition? How do we make sure that we're not adding to the footprints of our customers' products, but in fact, removing materials? And then, frankly, how do we start to account for those avoided emissions? And I think that's when you get way downstream, the benefits that we produce are invisible because they didn't happen. It's emissions that are avoided downstream. And our customers love that, and they can talk about the success they've had in decarbonizing their Scope 3 and everything. Yeah. But we're the ones financing it, paying for it, and we just want that to somehow be recognized in the commercial transaction. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole clean energy transition is dependent on all of you, but certainly you have brought more to light to me in our conversations here about how central it is even to the specifics of the clean energy transition. So I look forward to hearing more. So Jawaad, how about you? Why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me. Great to be here. Distinguished panel. Absolutely great to be here. My name is Jawaad Malik. I'm the Vice President of Sustainability and Strategy at SoCalGas, a position that did not exist 3 years ago, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And Adam, we have visited your facility in Paramount. Everybody should go see that. It's fascinating. So, we are, just an introduction for folks that don't know SoCalGas, we're the largest LDC in the country. We serve over 21 million customers with natural gas. We're a transport company, infrastructure company. We don't make any dollars off of the actual commodity itself. So agnostic to that, really looking for lower carbon fuels to transport in our system. We have a safe, reliable system that's underground that's touches on some of the resiliency themes that we talked about earlier, and I'll touch on those a little bit later as well. For us, we made a huge pivot back in 2021 with my position when, similar to what Mitch was saying, sustainability was about water quality, or sometimes, frankly speaking, it was a marketing. You just talked about some of the things, the trees planting and some of those aspects. And, my challenge was to put a strategy together for a gas-only LDC and shape that policy to match where the state of California is going. Just like New York, California is really proud of where it is in the forefront. They have a goal to be net zero by 2045. As a gas utility, you can't have a goal that's anything further than that. So the goal was set for us to be net zero across all three of our scopes, Scope 1, 2, and 3. Scope 3 is 94% of our footprint. It's the energy our customers use. And so it's a daunting challenge. And to support that ambition, we undertook a pretty substantive pathway analysis and economy-wide decarbonization quantitative analysis for the state of California, which was really trying to answer three questions, like what are the pathways to get to net zero for California? What are the most affordable, reliable, most feasible ways to get there? And what pathways actually solve for the entire economy? So not buildings, not transportation, but some of the industries up here, heavy-duty transportation, ports, and power generation. So results of that work really indicated nothing surprising in the room. It's an all-the-above solution. You have to leverage the gas infrastructure that customers have paid for, that's safe, that's reliable, with cleaner fuels. I tell a story that's very similar to where the electric market was about 20 years ago. I actually started at LA Water and Power, so I can speak about electric if I need to. But the RPS goal was set, and it was a daunting goal when it first came out. And now we're doing such a fantastic job of decarbonizing the electrons that we're delivering. over the same infrastructure. So our goal is really the same, is to use the infrastructure we have today and transport cleaner molecules, and especially solve for some of the hard-to-abate sectors, and then continue to provide resiliency on the power sector. The stat I heard is the same stat we have as well. Energy use is going to double, and as you're getting more renewables online, you're going to have that resiliency challenge, and clean fuels like clean hydrogen, RNG can support that from a peaking perspective. So I'll pause there and look forward to more discussions as we move on.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the urgency of this and how each of you is sort of meeting the moment. And I'm going to start with you, Adam, and I brought a prop with me today. So I was having a conversation at the happy hour last night talking about a lot of us had to fly here today. And there's a lot of climate guilt for those of us in this field for how much air travel we do. And it's also a challenge for businesses, right? As much as we learned from the pandemic that we can do business virtually, flying is still going to be part of business and, of course, part of everyone's personal life as well. And so how we're marrying this is part of the story that I think you're going to help us learn from today. And so my prop is just the napkin that I got on the flight that I took here. And I was fascinated in noting that it's all about sustainable airline fuels. And there's a little ad for it for every single traveler. And I doubt every traveler has any idea really what that means. So this one says making napkins fly planes. And so I'd really love to know more about that. Cool. But maybe you can tell us a little bit about how quickly the aviation sector is moving and what the urgency is that's driving it.
Thank you, Marian. And you don't need to save your napkins today because the napkins don't quite power the aircraft yet. But you can save your French fry grease. That will work. So what we're looking at with aviation and net zero flying is you can actually fly net zero today, and we've demonstrated that in a partnership with Etihad. For COP27, we delivered more fuel than actually the Etihad flight used that left from Dulles. We used a book and claim chain of custody system. So the molecules were delivered to the least carbon intensive location, which was LAX. And we booked all of those emissions reductions to Etihad. And we did it, that covered the entire percent of their fuel use. We have a product that on a life cycle basis reduces emissions by about 84%. We have driven down the carbon intensity from our feedstock suppliers. We currently use tallow and use cooking oil, sustainable cover crops such as carinata. Those still have a small carbon footprint, but the largest part of our carbon footprint is hydrogen. And we're in the process of figuring out how do we integrate hydrogen into our production facility, because that will drive us down to below 90%. So what you can do on a book and claim basis to fly net zero is you can have more fuel volume delivered than you're actually responsible for, and that's how we get to net zero. And in fact, all of the technologies for aviation really should be on a level playing field, and we should look at electric aviation, which has promise maybe in 2040 and beyond, and hydrogen with a similar timeline. Those really should be evaluated based on their life cycle emissions. So the embodied energy that goes into the solar panels, into the wind projects, that all has a climate impact, and that's how we're evaluated. And if you do that, you'll actually see that as of today, the current product that comes out of our plant gets better performance than a solar-based green hydrogen product or electric flying from the grid. Those are more carbon intensive. And it will be a while before they'll actually even equal our performance. And we get the same relative carbon performance as green hydrogen. So if you were to fly directly combust hydrogen in your aircraft engine, it would be about the same carbon performance that we get. But if you fly on a hydrogen aircraft, which doesn't exist yet at commercial scale, or an electric aircraft that doesn't exist yet at commercial scale, both of those technologies carry a carbon footprint that cannot be addressed through book and claim, because you'd just be booking and claiming someone else's flight. Right. So this is kind of an interesting space we're at, where the fuels, because we can deliver more than is actually consumed, we can get to net zero. And it's really important to note that we see a lot of press and hype around electric and hydrogen flights. Those are critical pieces of the puzzle for energy transition. But for flying, for the foreseeable future, we are going to need liquid fuels through 2050. And those will probably be necessary even beyond for long-haul flights. The aircraft that we're producing today have a 20 to 30 year lifespan. They're still going to need liquid fuels in 2050, and that's why our product and others that are making liquid fuels is so critical. So I think it's important to note that we can do this. We also need to move beyond the bio-based fuels because there are only so many sustainable molecules that are available. You mentioned napkins, Marian, and eventually we'll be able to use a cellulosic, like a woody biomass, into our production process in the form of a pyrolysis biocrude that will come to us through a company potentially like Alder, that you may have heard of, that United has backed, and others, that could be actually part of our lipid-based process. But even with waste biomass, we still will not get there all the way. So that's where electrofuels, commonly known as power to liquid, which combines a green hydrogen with a carbon capture from an industrial process or carbon from direct air capture, synthesizing those together into a biocrude is an important part of decarbonizing aviation. And we actually intend to build a plant in Houston by 2028 that will be electrofuels based.
Excellent. Oh, were you going to follow up?
Well, just on some of the terminology that, and I'm very excited to hear this use case of like life cycle and book and claim and these things. I think if we look back at how we got the ball rolling on electrification and the electrons of having RECs and a secondary market of securities that represent the sustainability benefits and so on. We're starting to see that in atoms now, and this is the big breakthrough, is if we can have a same kind of secondary market securitization of the benefits of the atoms, right, just as we have of the electrons, then we'll start to be able to bootstrap our way through this because people will pay more for the atoms that come along with those certificates. And that's, as those who have been involved in the energy business know, you do a 10-year deal, you pay it all with RECs. It's kind of like found money, and it's harder than that, of course. But we've gotten to a point where everyone trusts the business model. It's legit. We've got to get to a point, there's a lot of debate about, is it book and claim, is it traceability, is it physical connection, all this kind of crazy stuff that we're talking about in the industry. This is going to surface pretty soon when you look at your package in the store and there's going to be a zero carbon sunscreen and a full carbon sunscreen. All that's going to be is book and claim, certificates, other things, traceability, and so on. But unless we want to really get serious about being able to get through this transition, and yes, there are going to be some new facilities built in the next couple decades. That's not because people are putting their fingers in their ears and saying this is going to go away. Right. It's just this is the transition. And we want outcomes-driven policy. We want people to be driven towards the lowest possible kind of impact of their electrons or their atoms. And I think this is an example of it. But we got to all trust the process a little bit. I think introduce this language in a new way. But the fact that it's been done for climate eases the conversation a bit.
Well, that's great. I think both of you teed up Jawaad pretty well. So maybe I'll tee up a question for you and you can integrate it. But, Adam said the phrase leveling the playing field. And then I think you used a phrase, all of the above. Yeah. So I guess, I'd love for you to expand a little bit on the role of natural gas and also this finger in your ears that Mitch was just mentioning. So talk about the short term, the medium, the long term play with respect to the natural gas.
Sure, we'll do, love to. But just maybe a 2-second point on I was just going to add something to it. Great point, Mitch, on comparison to the electrons. And I think the other thing is just like RPS-like standards, procurement mandates. I hate the word mandates, but if you target, you'll bring that cost down as well. So I'll pivot back to your question. So natural gas, the short term, long term, I'll try to explain this. It's sort of a complicated dance we're doing where, today we're serving 21 plus million customers, as I mentioned earlier, safe, reliable, affordable service, maintenance of that system, and then obviously supporting the electric system as well. I think a lot of folks in this room probably know this, but a lot of folks I talk to don't really realize that the amount of RPS that's come online in California over the last 20 years has really been on the back of the resiliency that the gas system has been providing with those peaks and resiliencies during when the sun's not shining and the wind's not blowing. So that's the model today, and as we pivot forward in this energy transition, speaking of all the above, we're looking at all of the different various tools that we have in the toolbook, whether it's drop-in fuels like renewable natural gas in our system. Today we have over 5% natural gas being transported in our system. Our goal is to get to 20% by 2030. A lot of that is going to be food waste and other landfill fuel sources, so there's a double benefit there. Again, we're trying to figure out what scope that is. If it's a scope 4 or 5, we'll figure that out. But there's benefits there on that side that we're moving forward. Also looking at hydrogen, we talked about that a little bit, both in the form of blending amounts of hydrogen in the existing infrastructure. Right now in Europe, you're about 20% in certain countries that are testing up to there. We have a pilot that's underway that's going to test up to 5% hydrogen in our system. So again, decarbonizing the fuel that we're shipping forward. And then Adam touched on this a little bit, the process of power to liquids. The power to gas side of the house, you can create either hydrogen or synthetic methane, which is also a clean green molecule, e-gas if you want to call it. So you can also start delivering that in your system as well. Then, future state, Marian, I mean, we're really trying to lean in and try to create a hydrogen infrastructure, a dedicated hydrogen infrastructure, a backbone infrastructure, where we can connect sources of additional solar and wind electricity that may be curtailed, and bring that into the LA region and help decarbonize some of the hard-to-abate sectors, because there's going to be a lot of demand, especially as the ice bands and other issues start making their way forward. And then on resiliency, it's a really, really interesting topic for us as well, and we're really trying to put a value on resiliency. There is an intrinsic value on resiliency. People want lights on, they want their stoves on, they want things to work. Going forward, as we start seeing more and more electrification of buildings, electrification of transportation, the grid we talked about already, the grid's going to be expanded as well. But as the renewable sources continue to outpace battery technology, whether you're using 8-hour battery or 12-hour battery technologies, you're going to need that seasonal long duration storage aspect for peak ramping. And a lot of the entities are looking at hydrogen as a way to potentially use for some of the peaker plants, especially here in the LA basin. There's a commitment by the LA DWP to transform their 4 basins to take hydrogen going forward. The other piece of the puzzle that we're trying to solve and lean into is carbon management. I think we all know that any study that you do for California or broadly, there are, whether it's 30 to 50 to 60 million metric tons of carbon that needs to be dealt with. We feel like we play a role as an infrastructure company to provide pipe infrastructure to move carbon from source to sinks. In the case where you can't store the carbon, then you have processes like Adam described, where you can use that combined with hydrogen and create either e-liquids or e-fuels. And last but not least, one of the exciting things that we're looking at is how we can integrate and support the electrification that's taking place as we're adding more load, as we're getting close to the brink of potential. We didn't do it last summer, we survived, but the blackouts keep getting pretty close. So thinking of ways to get a lot of these diesel generators replaced with linear generators that use either renewable natural gas, potentially can use hydrogen in the future. There's a company called Mainspring up north that's working on technology that can take several types of clean fuels to support and power for not hours, but weeks. And then also you have hydrogen fuel cells that can support and back up substations, especially when you're building out new electrified buildings in areas of high fire risk, or if it's a densely populated urban area where it's very difficult to build out new electric transmission or distribution. You can actually have a fuel cell connected to the gas grid running on either clean hydrogen, RNG today, or clean hydrogen in the future, and provide that backstop in case of a PSP event or an event where you can't create more infrastructure. So again, the volume of gas usage is going down, but then you have infrastructure that you can use and leverage to lean in and support where the state is going with electrification and provide that resiliency. So that is kind of in a nutshell, what we're trying to do today and moving forward. It really is sort of a twin plan of really running a system that's safe today. Leakage is an issue. We're making sure that our pipes are tight. You can't talk about hydrogen if you can't run a safe natural gas system. So safety is paramount. But those are some of the exciting things that we're working out to kind of move the industry forward.
All right, great. So I'm going to turn to you, Mitch. It sort of comes down, a lot of this does come down to the materials, the chemicals, right? So I guess the question that I have is, the business that you represent is on a growth trajectory for many reasons, but certainly part of this clean energy transition is putting wind in your sails for your constituencies. So how can you continue to feed that growth while also aiming toward a decarbonization pathway?
Well, it could be a good problem to have if the downsides weren't so catastrophic. I think, frankly, there is this. We are growing as a society, as an economy. The demands are growing. No matter which swap out materials we use, there's a demand growth, and I think that we're going to see that transpire elsewhere in the world and only exacerbate the demand issues that we have. I think what always helps, and we, as I said, we're a service provider to brands and consumer packaged goods and others. We live and die by what's in the RFP. You mentioned procurement. I think that I think that the world will be saved by our procurement officers if they can insert demands for performance, these new performance demands that people are asking for. I mean, we've been working hard to meet aggressive performance demands in other categories. The automakers want their cars half as heavy. We figured it out. There's plastic parts all over the place now that instead of metal, and now we're starting to figure out, can we make that plastic out of other materials? And so those things happen when it comes down the demand chain. And so we're starting to see that now. We're starting to see a lot more real demand coming, and frankly, our members are starting to build facilities to respond to that demand. And what we're noticing is a phenomenon of what we call demand overhang or immediate sellout. So somebody announces a new facility to take mixed plastic waste and convert that via pyrolysis to a feedstock. That whole factory was sold out for the next 20 years of its life the moment it was announced. And in fact, there's more demand for those kind of new chemistries than the capacity allows for. And so that the prices are going up. And so our members are interested, and they're getting into the market now because there's a profit to be made. And so I think that if we rely on the traditional market mechanisms for these large industries, the solutions will emerge. I think that this is what's really great to see is that we have this kind of assumption that we are going to decarbonize in the consumer space. There's this, and it's only, that cohort is only growing as we age and mature and people learn what's happening. So, that is the guiding light, is that there is this assumption that we must decarbonize. So now, it's always hard to figure out, where do you point the finger, who's got to go first, but we don't have to because we have this beautiful market mechanism that will do it for us. And we have these wonderful incentives that have come through the IRA and other things. I mean, our colleagues in Europe, where it's all about the government controlling your capex and telling you what to invest in, versus here this model of just subsidizing your opex and letting you go out and figure out exactly what technology works for you, and as long as the carbon reductions are there, you get the credit. Whether it's carbon capture or hydrogen, all these things. Members are flocking. We're seeing members announce shutting down facilities in Europe, moving them here, or just increasing the capacity of their facilities here, and then importing to Europe from here because of the carbon footprint issues and the facility to do business in these new models in this country. So I think that it's a complicated trajectory. We're spending billions of dollars. There's a business here. There's that this is happening. It's not kind of it's good for us. The business of green chemistry or sustainable chemistry is going to be a huge boon for our industry, so we want to do it. And I think that that's the alignment of benefits is really what's valuable here, is that it will be better for our business to be highly sustainable. And so once you hit that tipping point, it's a question of implementation. How quickly can we go? Can we meet our deadlines and so on? But it's not a question of will. It's a question of when.
Excellent. So all of you have done a really great stage setting about how the interplay of your sectors sort of works and what the drivers are and some of the solutions. But maybe you could each give some examples of bringing this home to people in ways that will resonate with this audience. So I guess I'm going to go back to you, Jawaad. I think you had an example of some really interesting innovation and solutions or pathways for those
hard to electrify sectors, right? Everybody is really hoping that electrification will bring us a long way. So I'd love to hear from you about some examples of how you're playing in the space of those that are going to be harder to electrify.
Sure, absolutely. And it's funny, as you're talking about counting molecules and electrons, I'm a finance professional by training, and my kids heard me talking about CH4, and they're like, Dad, I thought you counted numbers. I said, well, I count molecules now. So it's still counting. So it's on the same path. So for innovation on hard to electrify, we talked about the study we did earlier, and it was validated with a lot of the academics. And the interesting thing about the study we did is we used all of the states' assumptions from the CEC and ARB on the electrification side of the assumptions. So 90% building electrified by 2045, 100% of light-duty vehicles converted over. There's some debate on the high end of the heavy-duty trucking between long-haul trucking and drayage and whatnot. We assume that most of those might be hydrogen fuel cell just because of weight and efficiency. So one of the projects that actually, so this is interesting. So usually you do a white paper, you do a study, and it's great, and it goes on some shelf. One of the recommendations from the study was to look at a hydrogen backbone, just like they're doing in Germany, in Italy, in France. And so the project that we're putting forward that we're really excited about is called Angeles Link. It's one of the first and largest projects in North America, just focused on green hydrogen. It's a green hydrogen pipeline that's designed to connect some of the solar and wind production that's going to continue to grow on the east border of California and create a green hydrogen only, so this is clean hydrogen only pipeline, connecting it to the LA basin. And as we talk about hard to electrify sectors, one thing people don't realize about Los Angeles, it's beyond movies and beaches. It's the largest manufacturing center in the United States. This was surprising for me as well. There's a lot of plastic, heat, steel manufacturing, World Energy's here, refineries, power plants, et cetera. So the thought was these hard-to-abate sectors, which could be 20 to 30% of the footprint here in California, are going to need a source like clean hydrogen coming into the basin. So this transportation pipeline is designed to bring excess renewables that normally we would sell to our neighboring states for pennies on the dollar, use that, put an electrolyzer on site, create green hydrogen, use the pipe as storage, or it's arbitrage between they want to use it on site or transport it down to customers. And then we have end users like LA Water and Power. I mentioned they want to convert 4 power plants to be 30% hydrogen in the next 10 years and then eventually 100% hydrogen. So that's a huge demand source that can't be electrified. Heavy duty transportation we talked about. We're going to see a lot of trucks transfer over with the new CARB trucking rules, especially from the ports to some of our industrial cities, 710 corridor, underserved communities. So there's equity justice issues that you can resolve from that perspective. And then you've got some of the manufacturers and refiners that need that green hydrogen, like World Energy, for some of the transformation work that they're doing. And then lastly, the ports. We've got 2 of the largest ports here, Long Beach and Los Angeles. There's a lot of opportunity there, not only just for hydrogen being delivered, but hydrogen being used as a feedstock to potentially convert into ammonia or methanol to use with shipping companies like Maersk. So they're running on clean fuel as well. So those are all the hard to electrify sectors just in the LA basin that we feel like our expertise with pipeline infrastructure and delivery of gaseous fuels can connect source to demand centers. So excited about that. We have early approval from the Public Utilities Commission for feasibility studies. It's a broad stakeholder group to make sure that we're not stepping in front and making sure environmental groups, business groups, policymakers, others are coming along for the ride. So really excited about this project, and I think it can replace up to 25% of our natural gas usage if we're able to create this asset and bring the types of volumes we think we can. So.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go back to Mitch. So, Jawaad, you were just talking about a variety of ways that what you're going to what your industry is doing is helping really everyone here, right? Everything that we're doing in these hard-to-abate sectors is really having downstream impacts to help all the people in the room meet their targets. So, Mitch, I'd love for you to talk about it. You've used a phrase called a lower emissions enabler that the chemistry industry brings to help everyone else. So maybe you could talk a little bit about sort of what that means and how the chemical industry helps enable those emission reductions of all of the users.
Well, I think it's, it's material choice and, really thinking a little bit more about the, what goes into it instead of just what comes out of it. And I think that's a conversation that's been maturing with our members. As I mentioned, like the auto industry was maybe the canary in the coal mine of really having to find a route to not a decarbonization, but a lower carbonization. And they turned to advanced materials. They turned to what can we do to have the same performance, but not the same weight, And so we went through that whole, revolution over the past few decades. It's time for another one, It's time for, let's take that plastic and say, what can we do that change the source of that plastic, And so I think that there are always new demands coming to us, and there's always a scientific way to make it happen and solve it. I think what we do, we need to all confront is the limited capacity we do have on the new emerging fuels, feedstocks, energy sources, and so on. It's aggravatingly slow to come to market because we've all made our mental switch. We've all decided we are no carbon. We are net zero already in our minds. And anything that seems to not be totally aligned with that is seen as a point of aggravation. But think of the life cycle. Think of this challenge kind of like we do of a product in looking at the life cycle. So got a gallon of fuel. You go through a full life cycle analysis of what it took to get there, what's going to happen to it, you take two different ones, you do a eco-efficiency analysis, you choose the better one. If we were to look at the whole life cycle of what happens for society from now until 2055, there's a lot of different routes it can take, but we kind of know where we want to get to. There's no penalty for not getting there before 2055. Now, I know we all would like things to happen faster, but we've kind of made these agreements, and maybe it's 2050, maybe it's 2045. But let's all agree that that's the time frame that this is going to take. You don't tell a semi-truck driver driving 60 down the highway to turn around because they're going to the wrong place and say, do it now, come on, you're going to the wrong place. The driver is responsible, and they have an obligation to safety to find the next exit, slow down, turn around safely, look around, and get on the road in the other direction. And that's where we are right now in these hard-to-abate industries. We know what needs to be done. And we hope you all understand the kind of specificity that we're going to need from you to make sure that we get all of the new parameters and the new benefits in there, and so we can justify to our suppliers and others why we need them to decarbonize as well. So I don't know that there's a single answer or a simple answer to it, but I think that it is a growing business. We are a growing economy. We shouldn't be complaining about that. We should be finding a way to do it without the negatives that came in the last big wave of growth.
Great, excellent. Okay, so Adam, I'm going to allow you to sort of switch us from both conversation about sort of what we're doing and what the solutions look like, and perhaps a little bit about what you need or what the barriers are, or what's really needed to accelerate this. So maybe you could talk about what's working, what's not working with sustainable aviation fuel, maybe in the policy arena, and then what would you like to see next? What's necessary to accelerate this? Keep it going.
Thank you, Marian. Yeah, so I was at a conference on Tuesday, and Jeremy Grantham spoke, obviously a luminary when it comes to looking at startups and climate solutions. And he said, quote, about the Inflation Reduction Act, the greatest global bribery that's ever occurred in the climate. And it was interesting. I think what Mr. Grantham actually meant to say was it was the most necessary solution for harder to abate industries. And I think that's because the economics are different. Solar and wind have had a huge head start. For heavy industry, we're really at ground level, and we need support. We need capital investments, and we need an acknowledgement that there'll be cost premiums for the foreseeable future. That's very true in aviation, but it's also true in shipping and in these other sectors. And what we need to do is have that reliable backbone, the foundation of the government policy. Let's continue with that. And have policy certainty, so long horizons like the renewable fuel standard, which doesn't actually expire. That's much more preferential over, say, the blender's tax credit, which is gone in 2 years, or changes to producer's tax credit. So that's what our banks and investors want to see, is the policy certainty. And then on the voluntary side, we really think this is a critical place, and Mitch had mentioned about this credit system. In aviation, we were instrumental. I led a group with Clean Skies for Tomorrow and the World Economic Forum that developed the SAF certificate. What was revolutionary about the SAF certificate is it allows for multiple parties in the supply chain, it's an in-setting mechanism, to be on the same certificate. So you could have a scope 1, the airline party, and their end customer on the same certificate, which also means they both could contribute to the premium simultaneously. And I think this concept can carry over to other industry, other sectors. It can be instrumental with unlocking the demand and ability to pay for all of you, from corporations, to cover this price premium and for us to accept, look, flying and other types of heavy-to-abate industries may cost us 20 to 30% more, and we can help shoulder that burden by making these voluntary contributions. The one piece, though, we still need is to have an effective ecosystem to ensure transparency, third-party certification, and make sure that the feedstocks are truly sustainable. Those pieces are in place and starting to be developed, and I want to give a shout out to C2ES and Gold Standard with the Advanced Indirect Mitigation Program that's helping to create a program that will recognize these market mechanisms innovations, because I think they're so critical. We cannot solely rely on the existing frameworks like the Greenhouse Gas Protocol and wait for them to make the changes necessary to recognize innovation. So I think this is really important as we support and recognize these new innovations around market solutions.
Okay, well, you touched on a couple of things that I thought would be helpful for us all to sort of bring it home. So I guess we'll start at the end with you, Jawaad. And I guess I want to ask all three of you the same question, and maybe, Adam, you just answered it. But it's sort of a two-part question. What do you need to help continue sort of moving forward in this space? And then how can the consumers and the people in this room, the people who are responsible for doing the accounting, for driving towards their targets, what kind of assurances are you able to provide, particularly when there's a premium, to let everyone move forward with confidence and partnership with all of you to together meet those goals?
Yeah, thanks, Marian. That's a great question. A lot of different ways to answer it. I think up front, I think strong indication, and I think I commend the DOE for really leaning in on the hydrogen space, especially with the Earthshot challenge to get the production cost down to under $2. I think those are the type of indications that really start making some of the concepts that we're talking about here on the stage more of a reality. Because, again, I'll compare this to where we were in the electric industry 20 years ago with the RPS program. The more tax benefits, the more renewable portfolio standards, the renewable fuel standards, the LCFS programs, all of those, when you step back and look at it from a lens where are they providing a solution from that perspective or not? Are they allowing for other fuels of low carbon nature compete from that perspective? And then collaborating. I think we've got to have a lot of more of these government, private, public partnerships, academic partnerships, to pilot programs before saying yay or nay, see the benefit of these programs. Marianne, to your point, measure results. Is there an actual life cycle saving with moving in one direction versus another? And then lastly, I think from an overall perspective, a lot of you are in this space where whether it's on the accounting side or looking at policy from a different perspective. Again, I ask that you step back and look at the full ecosystem. Today, energy use in the world is 80% fuels, and we're trying to get to net zero by 2050. Even that is going to be a 50-50 split between electrons and molecules. So there's a lot of ramp work from the electron side as well that needs a lot of support, whether it's infrastructure, and then the scaling up of vehicle adoption, the scaling up of charging infrastructure, et cetera. And on the molecule side, again, support for H2 stations, support for the prices of electrolyzers coming down, and again, pilot projects that we can demonstrate and show resiliency and low carbon energy support. So that's a lot to ask, but those are some things on the top of my list.
Sure, Mitch.
I would say go back to procurement, be very verbose in the specific benefits that you want in your purchase. And I think that once that happens, then we can start to have a little bit of a competition about who could deliver those most cost effectively. I think right now there's an assumption that everyone's going to figure out how to give us the same thing for the same price. I mean, that never happens. Anytime there's a huge new thing that you want, the prices go up. As I mentioned, the demand overhang is real. It's going to cost more to navigate your way as one of the first companies through this, where your embodied carbon of your products is low. And jump at it if you can. Talk to your suppliers, talk to everybody, but demand it very clearly so that we can then start to watch the market work. Thank you.
Great. Adam, anything on your end?
Really quick, I think, if your company or organization can invest in sustainable fuels, we need the help for capital. But also on that voluntary demand side, if you show that you can be a climate leader and have the confidence, even if CDP doesn't necessarily have the right field for reporting, science-based targets may not recognize book and claim yet, we understand that there are solutions that you could do today. And in fact, it's a chicken and egg challenge. If we don't have the capital, we won't be able to make these investments and reach the goals in the time that's necessary. So as all of you are leaders, also think about your procurement in a leadership format, because that can be instrumental with driving change.
All right, well, that's fantastic. I'm just going to close this before opening it up to questions by sort of thanking all of you. You're really very much on the front lines, and we're all counting on you to succeed. These are hard to abate, and we need the innovation, we need the creativity, we need the long-term and the medium-term vision. And Mitch, in prepping for this call, you said, we can do hard things. So I just want to leave it on that. We can do hard things. There's a lot of innovation out there, there's a lot of space, and there's a lot of urgency around this. And so I hope everyone feels challenged by that and can tackle it head on.
Thank you.